Surprise, surprise, surprise. The US government has yet again reached its debt limit, and Treasury Secretary Yellen has warned Congress it'll now have to take extraordinary measures. I would say this is completely unbelievable, but let's be honest, it's extremely believable and very predictable at this point how this will go. Both economists and bureaucrats like Janet Yellen will be warning Congress of the impending doom as it comes down to the wire, with politicians bickering back and forth about debt ceiling issues and where they're going to be spending their money and who's going to give what up to who. And at the very last second, finally something will be passed and they will avert imminent destruction right at the last moment with no seconds to spare. But the fact is, these things are becoming more and more frequent, not less frequent, and the odds of an actual US default are increasing over time. As Politico points out, there are some analysts who believe the risk of the US defaulting on its debt is higher than it has been in a very long time. There are a couple of things going on here. Number one, as a result of hitting the debt ceiling yet again, Yellen has announced to Congress that extraordinary measures have begun. So what are extraordinary measures and how long can these last before it becomes a real issue? Well, right now, it looks like the government will exhaust its resources around early June. But that's not an exact time frame because the amount of money that it receives from taxes will highly contribute to how long these emergency measures can last. These emergency measures include drawing down the Treasury general account, which peaked in 2020 around $1.7 or $1.8 trillion and has now been spent down to about $372 trillion. Keep in mind, the last time the debt ceiling issue came up, this account was spent down to a bare minimum of about $80 trillion. This account, if you're not aware, is basically like the government's checking account. As the government receives money from taxes and from borrowing, those dollars go into the Treasury general account. And then when they spend money, whether it's for politicians' paychecks, Medicare payments, education spending, military contractors, stimulus checks, or anything else, it goes out of that account. Since around 2016, the Treasury has liked to keep this account at a maximum of somewhere around $400 billion. And recently, Treasury Secretary Yellen has said that she wants to keep it around $400 billion as well. But as you may have experienced yourself, sometimes expenses go up and incomes don't go up enough to compensate. And so that reserve amount in your checking account or even your savings account, you got to spend that down sometimes. Other things included in these extraordinary measures include selling investments and suspending reinvestments in different retirement funds for the civil service, postal service, and the federal employees retirement system thrift savings plan. And by the way, for those of you who are interested and can make it, I'll be speaking at Jason Hartman's Empowered Investor Live Conference. This is going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona from January 27th through 29th. It's going to be a great event with a bunch of speakers. VIP tickets are already sold out, but there are still regular tickets available. Link in the description below. Now, all of these things that the government would stop spending money on before they default on their debt, it's not like these people aren't repaid, and it's not like these retirement accounts are not paid. As soon as the debt ceiling issue is resolved, all of that money gets back paid. Speaking of defaulting on its debt though, what are the chances now, since it's been happening more and more frequently, these issues with spending and borrowing, what are the chances the US actually defaults on its debt? Well, as Peter Schiff pointed out on Twitter, the question isn't about whether the US will default or not, but how it will default, either by not paying or paying in inflated dollars. To explain the situation very simply, say the United States government owes you $100. You have two choices. Would you rather the United States pay you back $99 so that you don't get back everything that they owe you? Now you can only buy $99 worth of stuff when before you lent them, you could have bought $100 worth of stuff. Your other option is they print a bunch of money, create new dollars, and pay you back $100. But since they had to create a bunch of new money out of thin air, prices just went up. So they still give you back $100, but when you go out to spend it, what you were gonna buy now costs $101. Either way, you're going to be $1 short. So whether they default through not being able to pay back the full amount that they owe, or they default through inflation, meaning in purchasing power, they can't pay back everything they owe, either way, they are defaulting. And the reality is, looking forward into the future, this will become more and more common because the government's expenses are going to continue to go up and up. Not only because the government will always continue to try and spend more and more money, but because everything that they've already spent is becoming more expensive for them. Because the United States government has been running deficits for so many years, we've stocked up a nice little pile of about $32 trillion worth of debt. And debt is not interest-free. And so the amount that the government has to pay in interest continues to rise. This is because for years, the government was borrowing at interest rates that are much lower than they are at today. And so as their debt comes due, they're paying off debt that was 1%, 1.5%, 2%, and they're only doing that by taking on new debt with a new interest rate of 3.5%, 4%. Now, this particular issue will not become a big problem for the next couple of years, but at some point it will become a problem where the total amount of interest the government has to pay will exceed every other expense that it has. At this point, you can bet your last dollar that the Federal Reserve will step in and they'll just start buying up all that debt. Because once the government can't afford to pay its interest expenses on its debt anymore, the quality of that debt will drop drastically and people won't want to own it because they know the chances of not getting paid back are very high. So the Federal Reserve will print dollars into existence to buy that debt, basically creating new money to fund the government's expenses, including its interest expenses. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that's exactly what I described in my example of how the government defaults through inflation, which means that this chart of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet being at $8.5 trillion right now will eventually encompass the entire national debt. Now, I don't know if this is 2 years down the road or 10 years down the road, but it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. The only thing that would prevent something like this from happening is the government deciding to stop running deficits, balance its budget, and actually slow down on spending money instead of continuing to exponentially increase it. This is known as austerity, and it is a politician's and also an economist's worst nightmare, which shows you just how bright the average economist is. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.